101.5 Sanford, Pinehurst, Southern Pines. It's now time for the Recovery Boys, Lewis Finch and Macon Moy, as they spend the next hour with you discussing the issues of alcoholism and drug addiction, as well as the road to recovery. Here's Lewis and Macon.
So good evening, everybody. I'm Macon.
And I'm Lewis.
And we are the
Recovery Boys.
Lewis, nice to have you.
Yes.
Nice to be with you again tonight. Hope all is well with you.
Things are going well.
Awesome. Well, we thank everybody for joining us tonight. If you are listening to us on the radio, you've already got your opportunity to listen to the greatness that will come for the next hour.
Exactly.
But if you have friends who want to listen to us, you can listen to us online at therecoveryboys.com. That's our website, therecoveryboys.com. There's a listen live button on it. If you want to call us tonight and ask us a question, you can reach us at 866-465-3110, or you can email us through our website, and we will get those questions answered as fast as we can. It's just an interesting time, Lewis. Every time I think that things might normalize a little bit, they go backwards again. It's a little bit little bit like us in recovery. Luckily, we haven't done the backwards thing yet, but it's a strange time, isn't it?
Let me back up a second, because we do have the way to listen online. If you go to the WFJA website, there's a listen live button where you can actually listen in real time.
Right.
It's easy to do. Also, I haven't told you this, but I just re-upped on GoDaddy, our website.
Oh, cool.
So we're now committed for at least another year.
Fantastic.
I'm not going to waste $10, okay?
That's right.
Right?
Hey, listen, with our budget, there's nothing we can't do.
Exactly.
Everybody understands.
That's right.
Everybody understands.
We're throwing caution to the wind.
Yeah, understands that. And we have, we'll take the show in a lot of different directions. It just really depends on what kind of mood we're in. But we have a in-studio guest tonight. I'll let Lewis introduce him in just a few minutes. And as we always do at the start of our show, we're going to call, Kayla has been kind enough to join us tonight. Kayla, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. How are y'all?
We're doing good. Thanks. We're doing good. Thanks. How's everything going? How's that program of sobriety going for you?
It's going good. I actually went to a meeting in Sanford last night and saw somebody pick up 10 years, somebody picked up 6 years, and then a girl that's actually from my home group spoke. She just hit a year about a couple weeks ago.
Oh, that's cool. And where are you, Kayla? We were just talking about where you were in your recovery program. How many months do you have now?
I'll be at 11 months on the 9th.
Wow.
Fantastic. That's so cool. So cool.
Well,
and how are you finding the Zoom world? I mean, are you doing meetings in person, or are you doing some Zoom stuff? I mean, how does your program work for you now?
I really haven't done a whole lot of Zoom. My home group started meeting back at the lake, and then the meetings in Sanford have opened back up. We just have to wear a mask, which is a little annoying, but
yeah,
yes,
for the best, I guess.
And let me ask you something. Have you started? I know you have a sponsor. Have you started sponsoring other women yet?
No, not yet. I've got 3 more steps,
and
then I'll be ready to sponsor.
Well, you'll be a phenomenal sponsor. It's just my prediction. Lewis, any questions for Kayla tonight?
No, just when you started in this, did you have any idea how long you might work your way through the steps, and has it taken more or less time than you anticipated it would?
Well, I kind of set a goal that I wanted to be done with the steps by the time I hit a year, because they tell us to go through them fast, not to drag it out. So that was my goal, but the COVID kind of messed it up a little bit. So I'm going to be a little over a year, but.
Well, I think that we were just talking. I think that when you get a year, we're going to try and get you to come into the studio, and we will we'll do a cake, and we don't want to get too far in front of ourselves. We've learned the dangers of that as well, but we're proud of you, and we want you to know how much we support your program.
Very much so.
I think it's amazing. And hopefully other people are listening, and those people that are new to recovery, Kayla is a prime example of what can be accomplished if you do what you're supposed to do. And Kayla, any other advice you could give people? I mean, I know we ask you the same question every week, but you've given us some good responses so far. Anything else you would tell people new to recovery?
Just try to be as open-minded as you can. You may not understand why they're asking you to do what they're asking you to do, but it's been proven to work. So just be open to suggestion and do what they ask you to do. And
That's great advice.
That is great advice.
Too many people do not adhere to that.
Well, and one of the other things, and I was certainly I was guilty of this at the start, is that I was going to just. I figured out real quick that I could do the AA program better than anybody else, and so I was just going to change it so it fit my needs and fit my style. And it didn't take long for me to realize that that's not the way it works. Everybody does it.
Yeah.
Everybody does it the same way for a reason. It's because it works. So.
I felt like I could reduce it down to like 6 steps.
That's right.
Be done with it a lot quicker.
Well, listen, Kayla, thanks for joining us tonight. You have a good week, and we'll talk to you next show. Okay.
All right, y'all too.
Good night.
So, Lewis, before you introduce our guest, I do want to, as I've told you earlier, I lost a really good friend this week. A friend of mine, Tom Carey, TC, as he was known by, is responsible for me being alive today. He advocated for me when I was at the bottom, and the hospital really didn't want to spend any of their money on keeping another drunken drug addict alive. He got in their face. Anyway, he was one of my good friends, one of my dear friends, like a brother. Was in a horrific home accident about 6 weeks ago. Was burned, and he did not survive. He quietly went to the next place on Wednesday afternoon, and his sisters are in town, and we've been dealing with that. He lived in Charlotte. He was my promotion director at my radio station in Charlotte when we were doing that, and I will miss him. And I don't do a lot of social media posting, but I did post some pictures of when we first met. We were bartenders together. Imagine that, bartenders together.
That's fascinating.
That was a precursor to.
We could spend a whole program on that.
Yeah, that was a precursor to where I was going to end up. But in the mid 1980s, and he was part of my life. He's one of those guys where you become best friends in 5 minutes, and it just lasts a lifetime. I'm going to miss him. And one of the things, I posted some pictures of us when TC was, unfortunately, when he passed away, he didn't have any hair. But when I met him, he had a head full of hair. And so some of the people who worked with
Why'd you say unfortunately?
Well, Lewis, your look is by design.
I'm follically challenged.
Yeah, but your look is by design, no question about that. But I did want to post some pictures. And one of the things I did say, and I'll say it tonight to everybody who's listening, is if you love somebody, make sure you tell them you love them, because you never know when you walk out the door if you're ever going to see them again. And don't put off visiting people that you care about and you love. Don't put that trip off, or don't wait till it fits into your schedule, because you never know when your schedule is going to be altered. And so, unfortunately, it takes these events, which in our business, in recovery and working with drug addicts and alcoholics, death is one of those things that we deal with on a daily basis. But when it happens to somebody close, it really does impact you.
Well, and I was going to ask you, was there ever a thought when you were going through this that drinking or using, because of what you're going through, did it come to mind?
And maybe it's my program, maybe it's because I'm married to my wife is amazing, and we're both in recovery. But one of the things that continues to make sense to me, at least up till 10 after 6, 5 after 6, whatever time it is right now, is that problems, you can't hide from your problems and from all these things that happen to you. You can't hide from them with alcohol. And typically, what happened, at least in my case, is that alcohol made the problem worse. It didn't make it better. It made it go away for a little while, and maybe that gives you some false sense of security or relief or whatever. But when you wake up, which if you're lucky enough to wake up, it's always worse. And, it's funny, I was working with one of the guys that I sponsor this afternoon before I came down here, and we were talking about that. And I said, I never even considered drinking, never considered dropping a pill, because I've accomplished too much. Coming up on 8 years, and I'm one drink, one pill from throwing all that stuff into the trash can. And I just, it's going to require something dramatically stronger than what I'm going through right now for me to even consider it. But when you're in recovery, You never say never. And you know what I did? I get up in the morning. I have my program. I have the things that I do to stay sober, and I never alter them. Maybe sometimes my conversation with God is a little bit different. I mean, I certainly ask for an awful lot of healing for TC, which didn't happen. But that's not I don't control that. I can ask for it, but I can't control the outcome. And I think that's one of the things I've learned. So no, that's a long answer to a short question. Did I think about drinking? I did not.
I was thinking when you I did see the post you had on Facebook, and it kind of reminded me of when my first wife passed away. One of the very first things I did that day was take in a meeting. Not necessarily because I needed it, I probably did, but it was because it was such a part of my ritual at that point, and I felt it was my safe place.
Yeah, and you're also, one of the things that's absolutely predictable, one of the things that will happen, I don't care where you are in the country, where you're in the world, if you walk into a meeting, you're going to find people that care about what you're going through and will do anything in the world to support you, and that's what we all need. As a matter of fact, when you look at what's going on in our country right now, the whole damn country could go to a meeting right now, and what would be a bad place for them all to end up. I mean, the division and all the infighting and everything else is just so unbelievable to me. But I've always been amazed at how so many different kinds of people can come together in one room and have one common thing that they talk about and support each other. And that's one of the things the fellowship does. And it's absolutely amazing.
And we have no leader.
That's right.
I mean, think about that. There's nobody that is in charge.
Well, that's one of the first things we do is we turn it over to the leader that's not around. The one that we all have a different belief, but we all believe in something, and it's just been amazing. So anyway, tonight, dedicate this show to TC. I know he's probably irritated. He was
Hey, do me a favor, and you tell the story about what he did for you.
So I was, I was at the bottom. I finally finished all my money. I drank myself. I'd gone from absolute to aristocrat, and from really good pristine pills to whatever they were selling me on the street. Which God knows, half the time you'd get an opiate, the other half you might get a Tylenol, and you wouldn't know the difference because it didn't really matter. It was the event of putting the pill in your mouth that really mattered. What it did to you after it went in, but the expected relief sometimes is all you really want. It's all you really need. So anyway, I was at the end, and my organs were starting to shut down, and I had some major medical issues, and I had been to the hospital several times, and so this particular time, the guy at the ER just was tired of me, and I didn't have any insurance, and he was like, "Nope, we're not. You need to go somewhere else." And my friend TC had taken me in, and he got in that guy's face, and he said, "Let me tell you something." He said, "They'll name this hospital after this guy if anything happens to him when he walks out of here, because he's sick and he needs help." Anyway, he just advocated in such a powerful way that eventually they put me back in. And of course, I ended up in the intensive care unit for almost 3 months. I changed my life, and and my older brother happened to be there, and he watched TC, and he told me, we talked about it after TC passed away, and we were having that conversation. He told me, he said, "It hadn't been for TC," he said, "I don't know what we would have done." So, God works in mysterious ways. TC was he was that angel for me when I needed it. For all of us addicts and alcoholics, if we ever face that bottom, it requires people who care about us to help us. It's the only way you get through it.
That's a good point. We recently have had a couple of folks that I've been working with relapse. And the constant theme is they either did not have someone to advocate for them, or they didn't reach out for help.
Yeah.
And the biggest problem I think that we have as a group in recovery is that we don't know when to ask for help.
That's and that's the truth. And I mean, it's not something, we've talked about it a million times. You can't force help on somebody, but when somebody's ready to ask for it, you got to be there. I mean, you can't put it off. And you know what? If you have suffered the way we suffered, there's nothing you won't do for somebody because you know what they feel like. I mean, there's no feeling like waking up knowing that your next 24 hours required you to do things you didn't want to do to feel a way you didn't want to feel is a trap. I mean, it's a prison that we get stuck in. And if you ever get, you ask me what I think about drinking, all I have to do is close my eyes and go back where I was. And I don't have any interest in that room. I checked out of that room. I don't have any interest to check it back in. I can tell you that.
You play the tape in your head.
Yeah, I do. And it's important to do that. So, well, listen, enough about all that. TC, I love you. I miss you. As my son, my son texted me after, TC was like Uncle TC to my kids and to my brother's kids. And he texted me after I'd gotten through to all of them and told him TC had passed away. He said, well, Dad, he said, I don't know where you go in the afterlife. He said, but I can promise you TC's already got a couple things working.
I'll say he's probably negotiating with God right now.
Yeah, he's negotiating. Yeah. He's not negotiating. He's already got his deal figured out. He's just got to make everybody else understand it. So, that's just the way it works. But let's move on, Lewis, and why don't you tell us about our guest tonight?
Oh, him. Yes. So our guest tonight is, believe it or not, Will Guest. So
beautiful.
I kind of worked that in there, but Will and I have known each other now for 3 or 4 years. Will?
4 years.
4 years. Okay. See, I'm a little bit older. He's a lot younger. And Will is a facility director of a program that actually has its origin, I think, in Atlanta, right? And has legs as far away as Raleigh. And I'm gonna let Will kind of, but when we have families that come to us who have either adolescent children or kids younger than, say, 25, 26, Will's program is one of the first that we look at because it does have some unique characteristics that you can't find in most facilities. Will, would you mind amplifying what I just talked about and kind of let these guys know what you are up to?
Sure. Well, thank you guys, first of all, for letting me be on tonight. So I know Lewis and I have talked about this for a couple of weeks to trying to come out here, so thank you. And again, so my name is Will Guest. I'm the facility director of the Insight program. We're located here in Raleigh, and what we do is we deal with teenagers and young adults, so we say ages 13 to 25, that have drug and alcohol issues. And so dealing with that age and what we really start is trying to be what these two guys were talking about is the 12 steps, being sober, recovery. And we really geared and oriented towards teenagers and young adults. So first part for myself is I got sober myself at 18. And
wow.
I did.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank
That's amazing.
You. Thank you.
Yeah.
So 21 years sober. A lot of times I go to meetings, pick up those chips that Kayla was talking about. And a lot of times they come and question me to make sure this isn't your A, it's like, are you serious? And this means years, not days. But so one of the things was, so I had an uncle, or a family member who was in recovery, older man. And to me, growing up, I'd always seen him as someone who drank his life away. He was older. He had ruined marriages. He had ruined, really good jobs, his family. And to me, that was my version of AA. It was a bunch of 60-year-olds who got together and talked about these horrific drinking adventures that they would go on. Sitting there at a 16, 17, 18-year-old, I didn't relate to these people losing jobs. I was unemployable, talking about losing wives, and I wasn't even in relationship. I wasn't even dateable at this point. And so what I was really, really grateful for was that at some point coming in contact with an enthusiastic sobriety approach, which is, all it truly is it's an approach to the 12 steps for people who are in younger ages. Me walking into my first meeting, I didn't necessarily really want to be there either. This wasn't my idea of a really good day. Prior to that, I had gone and met with the counselor, and I'd kind of been a troublemaker, I think, or one of the difficult ones since I was probably the age of 13. And for me, and hopefully people out here, that are listening or viewing this, one of the things that they can relate to is I had a really, really good childhood. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. Grew up with 2 wonderful parents, eating dinner every night as a family. I really think we were about 17 before the first time, I started noticing we didn't eat family as together every night. We went to church every Sunday, private schools. We're a really good family. There was no trauma in my family. There, besides my one uncle, and I don't even know if he's really the one I spoke to earlier. I don't know if he's even blood related. He may have been adopted, so there was no even like, these, littered with alcoholism and addiction in my family. Grew up, very, very normal childhood. And at some point, this was probably 2 days before my freshman year of high school, my mom had asked me, had you done the required reading for high school? And I was like, no one does that any days. Like, like maybe back in the day when you went to school, but no one does that. And I rode my bike to the library. So a very innocent situation happening. And as I was walking into the library to read some book, my best friend at the time was, this guy, and he comes riding in. I'm like, what are you doing here? And he was like, man, I got to read the book too. And he was like, hey, I stole a bag of weed from my brothers. Would you like to get high? And I mean, at that point in my life, I'm 14 years old. It's go get high or go read a book. I mean, he could have said, we're going to go burn down the library. I would have probably done that versus reading a book. So we hike out and remember, I mean, I had just, and where I went to school, we had DARE. So I was very informed. I had parents who did all of the, information, and here's how bad drugs are. I'd seen all those commercials about, you get high once and you become this junkie and you're living under a bridge. And I mean, he didn't even have to finish the sentence. And I was like, let's go. And we smoked weed out of using a soda can. So anyone here listening to that, we've all been there, starting at some point, so it was glorious times back then. And I don't even know if I really got high that time. But I do know that about 2 weeks later, I was over at the same friend's house, and he had older brothers that where I went to high school were like the captains of the soccer team, had cool girlfriends, were popular. But to ask them if they got high, I mean, it would be an understatement. I mean, you could just look at these guys and you're like, these people get high. And we were over there, and his two older brothers invited me, George, and my other friend downstairs, asked us if we would like to get high. And I mean, we were all in unison. Yes, let's do this. I mean, and we proceeded for the next couple hours just to, smoke weed. I mean, and out of every possible apparatus. And this is the same stuff I'd seen in TV shows and movies. This was happening. And, at some point, and going back to the dinner time at my parents' house, I realized I was like, hey guys, this was a lot of fun. I need to go home. Didn't think this was going to turn out too well. So all of them were very alarmed, like, where are you going? What are you doing? And I was like, you don't understand my parents. I got to go home and eat dinner at a certain time, and all of them were very much like, do not tell them where you were, what you're doing, and so I walk home, and I think, and hopefully this is the part, and I think sitting here in good company, the thing that happened to me, and I think what kind of probably makes me bodily different than other people is I absolutely loved how that made me feel. I was walking home, I was 14 at the time, and I was finally comfortable in my own shoes, doing what I was doing with the people I was doing it with, and honestly, nothing bad was happening. It's not like, the police were following us. It's not like I was going to go try to find crack later on that night. I still had a place to go. I was walking home with my best friend. The funny part is my friend that I was walking home with was kind of like, I like this. We should do this, next month. Like, let's smoke a joint and go to the movies. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I want to do this tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Amen.
And so for me, I think that's just kind of where it started. Was I was one of those people. And I think what gets really tricky nowadays is there are those people, there's going to be 4 types of people. I mean, there's going to be a person who's just never going to do drugs and alcohol. I have a brother who's just, it's illegal. It's bad for you. Why would you do it? Then there's someone who's going to try it. And I think this was my dad. He drank one time in high school, had a horrific experience, just swore it off, never did it again. But then I think where it gets a little tricky is there's this 3rd and 4th type of person. A 3rd person is going to, try drugs and alcohol and really, really like the effects. I also think that's the same person. If you provide them a consequence, you give them a good reason to quit, they'll tell you they're going to stop, and they'll really follow through with it. The tricky part, which I'm on this 4th part, is that there's people who are going to do drugs and they love them. And that's, I love the effect of it. And again, there's nothing bad going on in my life. I was doing well, things were going good. But I would be the one, if you gave me a good reason to stop or provided me some consequences, I would say, hey, I'm going to stop. But I would not follow through with that. I'd be, high 2 days later, 4 days later, and super remorseful. I would sound like that 3rd type of person, but that just was not going to, I just wasn't going to change. And so that really preceded me. And, and I started school. I was one of those people who, I enjoyed high school. There was a lot of fun to be had. I had friends. I think I did well in school. If you were to ask my mother, she said I would do better. I had a lot of potential.
Heard that before.
The potential word.
Yes.
and wasting it. So it was a lot of conversations. I excelled in sports. I quickly learned that you could get high before school, and I was like, man, this makes class go a lot quicker. And things were really good. And I think if you're sitting here listening and you're in recovery, we all have this frame of reference. And like what Lewis had mentioned earlier is like, you're playing those tapes through. And there was always a time for me where I remember when it was really fun and things were really good. And then an incident or a situation happens. And it was the first time I got caught. And it was, to me, this is a normal thing. My parents found some drugs in my book bag at some point. And I mean, it was literally like, a nuclear bomb had gone off at the guest household. My dad was home in record time from downtown St. Louis. I don't know how he got there that fast. We had, if there was a military boarding school in Alaska at that point that was taking 15-year-olds, I would have been on the next plane. I acted really sorry, super remorseful. I think I had to write some reports about, the effects of drugs. And then I started seeing counselors and therapists and kind of going down that road. And, and truth be told, for me, I mean, the problem was I would go sit down with all of these people and going back to that whole thing that I think we all can relate to is that we really love the effects of drugs and alcohol. And everybody to me was trying to get in between me and that. And it was either saying, drugs are bad, which I didn't believe. If you would have done what I did the night before and meet with you at 10:30 in the morning in front of some doctor and they would have said, marijuana's bad, I'd been like, no, you didn't have the experience or the fun I had last night or the party we went to or the people I met or this experience. And so very, very humble beginnings. And I think, at that point I'm 15 and, that's the biggest trouble I've gotten into. All the bad stuff was going to start happening. And so I think it's, and again, remembering as the more time you get sober, the longer you have in recovery, there's always this tendency of remembering when it's good and not remembering when things started, that powerless piece, or when things that were important to you start getting taken away or going away from you. I was introduced to other drugs. I started hanging out with the girl. She was prescribed Klonopins at the time. We were going to a party. And she was going to throw them out the window. And I was like, give me those things. And, you read on the pill bottle, don't take and operate heavy machinery. Don't take and stay awake.
Do not drink. Yeah, do not drink with them.
So exactly. I saw that one bit really bold. And I was like, these things are little, so I'll take 6 of those and, start drinking. And I think I came to from a blackout maybe 2 days later. And I was at dinner with my parents. And I was like, oh, God, like what happened here? And go to school on Monday, and there's like pretty much like a red carpet from my car to the school, because of how big of a deal that was that weekend, and I have no recollection of what happened, and doing a lot of things that were just not of my normal, person. So did those a little bit for a while, and I think at some point I came home, and so I had very, very involved parents, and I think I came home and I had one of those days where I think I just started saying some really off-the-wall stuff, and saying, my mom asking me some normal questions like, where were you? How was your day? And I think I was starting to say some like off-the-wall stuff. And I still do remember this. She was asking me some questions, and if you guys have ever read like cartoons or like, the captions, there was this bubble going for my mom asking the question. So I wasn't even staring her at the face. I was staring, up to the right.
Words.
Yeah. So I mysteriously end up at a behavioral health hospital, and I end up staying there for 7-10 days, and we have this thing where we're all different. I don't belong. I'm in there with some guy who done so much acid, he has no motor skills, so he's balancing this yoga ball up and down the thing, and I'm like, man, what am I doing here? And there's 2 guys who their parents were on federal charges for some massive crack deal in Missouri, and I'm in there with this girl try to start her parents on fire because they wouldn't let her go out at night. And I'm like, really, what am I doing here? I do really well in school. I excel in sports. I'm recognized, in St. Louis as, for playing sports, my family, like what's the big deal? This was a big misunderstanding, no harm, no foul. Let's get out of here and let's go back to being normal. And I think for me, that was always one of the things I always struggled with was like, well, what is normal? And it wasn't until, a lot of things just started coming up. Lewis and I were talking at dinner before this that, we just have some of these, incidences that happen, and you kind of start realizing like, well, that's not normal. Like getting a DUI when you're 17 or getting your second one in 90 days, which, someone was telling me about.
Imagine that.
Yeah. And, and to us, it's always someone else's fault. fault. That police entrapped me. When I had to go to the hospital for those drugs, it was, because that dealer cut it with something weird. It was that fault. Oh, that principal was out to get me. It was that coach didn't like me, or, it was always someone else's fault. So kind of fast forward and getting to the spot is probably about 2 weeks before my senior year of high school, and I was set up to go to college. There was some, I could have played sports in college. I was set to graduate. And I think what's important is about a week or two before that, my dad had come home from work one day, and this is not good when your dad's usually home at 5:30 and it's 3:30, and
It's
I'm like,
not a good sign.
no, I was like, so what's dad doing here? Mom and my two brothers exit the house immediately, and then out of the way our house was set up, we have this fancy formal dining room in the back of our house, and he's like, we need to go to the dining room, which I was like, this is not good, So one of three things happened. Someone had died in the family, mom and dad were getting a divorce, or we were being transferred to somewhere for my dad's work. So nothing good. And he sits me down and he starts talking with me about have you starting to see some things that are have been different around the house. And at that point, my parents started going to some support group meetings, Al-Anon meetings for their own support, dealing with me.
Good for them, yeah.
And one of the things my dad talked about was, a couple months ago, we went out of town and we put your 15-year-old brother in charge or something like that. And I was like, well, yeah, that's crap. I'm 18. I should be in charge. And my dad's like, well, we don't trust you. Then he asked, have you noticed you've not been around, been able to spend time with just you and your brothers? You were a horrible influence on them. They're starting to imitate some of your behavior. My dad was like, we unplugged the phone after 6 o'clock because it's always some phone call. At work, I'm stressed nonstop about you getting that phone call that you've been arrested. And truly for me, if you were betting people and there was odds makers on Will Guest, from ages 16 to 18, you could have probably imagined every 3 months there was something. The police, the school, a family friend, someone getting called about something I'd done. And it was always never my fault. But where my dad cut it down to everything was, and we got serious here, was that he was like, I employ 1,000 people, hundreds of people where he worked. And he was like, if anyone were to ever lie to me, he's like, automatically fired. No more jobs. They would cease to work here. He then it talked about, we don't spend time, me and your mom don't spend time with people who are dishonest or lie. But, the problem is I have to leave work every day and I come home to one of the biggest liars that I know. And I know that we didn't raise you that way. Even down to when I'm supposed to leave work, I'm trying to find stuff to do because I don't want to come home and put up with you. Do you know your mom sits and cries about what she did wrong or what we should have done different about you? You're starting to affect the real family in a real big way. And, and all this was news to me. I was so self-centered. I was all about just, the next thing, partying, going out, doing whatever I wanted to. And where it got to is I promised, and I think probably in the history of hugs, me and my dad probably had the most awkward hug in the history, and I was telling him I'm going to stop, and I promised him, and in that moment, I really did mean it.
That's the truth. You do, when you make those promises,
you do.
You absolutely mean it from every ounce of you, right up to the point where they walk away, and then it's right back on.
So 3 days later, promised my parents, hey, I'm going to go out with some friends. There's going to be no drugs, no alcohol. I'll be home at 10:30. I think it's 3:30 in the morning. I'm using the wall to come in. My dad's like, what happened? What about that conversation that happened a couple of weeks ago? So I think at that point, they had just given up. And they're like, just finish high school. At some point, my parents were like, you're about to be 18. You're about to go to college. You can kind of lose our address and move on. And so I come home from, I'm at school, 2 weeks left of high school, and I have a bright idea to leave school. And, you're a senior, and you don't need to be at half school, half the days. And I handpicked two of the worst people at my high school, and we're walking out of school. And I know what happened. It was some teacher saw me and my friend Mikey, my other friend Donnie, walking out the front door. And, it was the three of us, and they probably thought a riot was about to ensue outside. So, of course, they contacted people. We got in a car, and we were pulling out of a parking lot. My principal comes running out, and, my friend that was driving the car was in the passenger seat. She yells at us all by our last name, so she knows who we are. We speed off, and it was almost like a, like a scene from Fast and the Furious trying to get out of this parking lot. We end up getting in a pretty bad car accident in the parking lot. We don't even make it out onto the street. And then when I say bad, we hit a car so hard in a parking lot that it shot the radio out the back window, and then the car started on fire. So again, being very intelligent and smart, I decided to take off, run down and hide underneath the car in the parking lot. And I was like, maybe my principal didn't see me. So to fast forward everything, I ended up getting caught. And it was one of those situations when my mom picked me up. The police officer who was arresting me because they found drugs in my, in my book bag, was like, "Your mother's here." And I remember asking, "Can I stay here, or what are some options you guys have?" And he was like, "She's really mad." And I was like, "I can imagine she is." And not to laugh about it, this is 21 years ago. It was probably the worst day of my life. I go home, and then the next best thing that's ever happened to me happened. I go home expecting, this was everybody's fault. They, were out to get me. It was the principal always has had it out for me. It was Catholic education. You can blame anyone in the world. And my parents meet me at the front door, and they say, "We love you, and we love you enough that we cannot enable this anymore. You are going to kill yourself doing this." And my mom was like, "I don't want to get the phone call that you're not coming home anymore." My dad's like, "We just can't tolerate this. You and your behaviors and your drug problem are ruining the family." So my dad, using the big words that he always did, was like, "We're going to set up the guest ultimatum." And, so what the guest ultimatum included was to live at this house and to be emotionally and financially supported by us. You need to be sober and in recovery, so no use of drugs and alcohol. And you need to be in a recovery program that we approve of. There's no lying or dishonesty, and there's no threatening behavior. And if you're willing to live by those, we'd love for you to live here and be a part of the family. The other option, now as 18 years old, was that you can choose to not do, so you can choose drugs and alcohol and that lifestyle over this. And that means that you will no longer be able to talk to your brothers. You'll no longer financially or emotionally be supported by us. And my mom's like, "You have 5 minutes to make to make that decision."
Wow.
I decided at that point, I was like, I've hated living with you guys since I was 15. So my mom's like, "You got 5 minutes to pack a bag." And she made it a point to say, "Don't take anything we gave you. You need to go figure out your life." And so we all have these, kind of us hitting our bottom.
That was very mean of them. Will,
That
that was incredibly mean of them.
It wasn't. And I've gone back and making amends and cleaning up. That was honestly the best thing that they've ever done. That was way better than what college I was going to go to, my 5-year plan, down to here's what you should have done. That was the most loving thing. And I owe that to them. And I'm alive today for that, because I was in really, really bad shape at that point. Things had gotten a hand out of with narcotics, drugs. My life really had become, using. And then that's all I really cared about. The problem was that I tried to act like other things were priorities. So I would say, school is really important, my family, my friends, sports, things like that. And then drugs were down at the bottom. And it was actually reversed. Drugs and alcohol were the number one priority, and way down there were the other areas. So I packed this bag, and I'm walking down, and I'm walking down this enormous long driveway that we had, and it's kind of that moment of clarity when you're like, this isn't where I really want to be. Like, I really am choosing drugs and alcohol. And then another weird thing happened, and this occurred to me. So, these best friends that we had, drinking buddies, people you get high with, and then you all of a sudden become like, we're not friends, we're acquaintances. Like, the reason why we consider we have a bond is because we spend time and use drugs and alcohol together. And I was like, man, I'm really choosing this over my family. I know this isn't right. And at some point, starting high school, I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to go into the Marines. There was serious potential for me to play, college sports. And here I am, all of a sudden walking out with a duffel bag of crap. And I'm going to go figure out my life at 18 years old. And just, this is not going to work. And so I will do this, for my mom. If it was not for her a couple times, and I made it very difficult, I was out for a while, and there was a couple times I would call. I'd say, "Hey, don't you want your son home? Don't you want to do this?" And my mom and dad really held true, was like, you got to be held strong to that ultimatum. I had a day where we all hit that bottom where I was just done, getting high. And so I'd been out for a little while after walking down, packing my bag, thinking, my old friends, I got this girlfriend, I got these enablers, let's call them for what they are. And at some point I just hit a bottom, and I was expecting this Motley Crue music video of hotels, mounds of cocaine, stripper, and just living the life. And maybe, I overdose, and then I come to and I'm going to get sober. I was actually hanging out with 3 of the biggest losers in the world, and they started referring to me as their friend. And these were people that we would make fun of. And I overheard them, and I was like, man, I've been spending a lot of time with them. And this is where my life's about to go to. I know I could be something better. And so I knew where to go and what to do, just like what we were talking about earlier in the broadcast was there was someone where I knew I just needed to go home. And so I went to my first meeting that night. And this is after a moment at 18 years old. My parents dropped me off in the parking lot, and I'm expecting, to be the only person, who had parents drive them to this meeting. I was the only person, that hadn't smoked crack, hadn't done all these, lived under this bridge. And I was so embarrassed. And, and I was like, here I was, man, I was supposed to be out in college. And here I'm walking into my first rehab, like this first 12-step meeting, but knowing that I needed to do something at that point. Life was not going well. And prior to that, everything that I thought I had power with, so it's at that point when your friends start saying stuff to you, when your drug dealer expresses concern with how much drugs you use, you're like, this is not normal.
Yeah.
It's not a good sign. Is
No,
it?
there's a lot, and kind of even, knowing that you need to do something different. But there's that fear, because it's that one thing that, works for you. And it's always kind of been the one thing that was there for you. I was always using drugs and alcohol, and it always made me feel a certain way. But there's also this point, and I don't know if I'm weird or not, but the part that happens is that drugs and alcohol stopped doing for what it did for me when I was 15, 16. It was now doing whatever just to feel okay. There was no that euphoria. This isn't fun. It's not like I'm going to go use and then go hang out with people. Most of the time it was by myself.
It was a maintenance program.
Exactly.
That's exactly what tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
Tolerance kicks in, and maintenance becomes the goal.
Correct. Yeah, and so I walk into this meeting, and it's and it happens to be a 12-step program exactly like where I work, and it's an enthusiastic sobriety program. And I walk up these stairs, and these two girls I was so embarrassed, and I walked up these stairs, and these two girls that I used to know that I went to high school with come walking down the stairs, and I'm like, what am I going to tell these girls? Like, why am I here? They're going to see me at this church. They're probably thinking I'm robbing the place with my reputation, And one of the girls is like, it's really good to see you. I've always kind of thought that if you needed, to get any help, this would be great. And I think where you're trying to go, that meeting is like up the stairs and down the hall, and it's really good to see you. And I remember having this conversation so distinct to me was that she was like, I appreciate you coming. And I don't know what you're going to end up doing, sticking around, being sober or not. But I would really appreciate the people that we used to run around with and hang out with that you wouldn't tell them where I was at. And because what she said was ultimately it was very hard for me to get sober if I was still going to hang out with those people. I found it necessary that I needed to disconnect with all those people that still use drugs and alcohol. And I was like, oh, that's great. That's awesome for you. Everybody kind of wondered what happened. We thought you had to move with your dad to Florida, this whole thing. And she was like, no, I don't think you understand. That's why I stopped talking to you. Which that made a lot of sense to me was, she had 4 or 5 months sober. She looked happy, and you could tell it wasn't because other staff was there or her sponsor, you could tell like she was different. And that made a lot of sense to me. It was that if I wanted to be sober, I needed to find other people who were in recovery to hang out with. If I wanted to continue to go out and use, drink, all that, I know those people. I shouldn't hang out with sober people then. It's kind of one of these things. I want to get really, really good at basketball. Shouldn't go hang out with the volleyball team. I need to be around the people doing the same stuff. And I went into this meeting, and it's exactly what we were talking about. And I think what's one of the fascinating things about like recovery, long-term recovery, 12 steps is the people that you meet that we would never know that we were going to meet. And I walked in there, and there was people dressed the same way I was, talking, laughing, and it blew me away. I mean, I was crying as I was walking into this building because where my life was at, and here people were laughing and it seemed like they thoroughly enjoyed their lives. And this 23, 24-year-old girl starts sharing her meeting, leading this meeting, and she talked about how she had where her life was at with a year and a half sober. She talked about where it was a year and a half ago and what she has done different, what she's done in between there. And it was real things that she was talking about. And, and I was so embarrassed to be there. I was like, looking at those 12 steps, and I'd already figured out I'd worked for those. I wasn't going to do any of the ones that say, the God is your understanding. I'm really not going to do that amends thing, so that would be like super embarrassing. And this guy comes in a couple minutes late to the meeting, and, and this, looking forward, this would be my future sponsor. I never knew this. He sits down and he just shares to raises his hand. And I was like, oh man, he looks so cool. And so now you're going to open your mouth. And he starts talking about how he had like 9 months sober at the time. And he just had one of those days that nothing went well. So, he went to school and he got the results from a test and he thought he was going to get an A, and he ended up, failing it. Goes out to the car, flat tire. At work, it was horrible. And he was like, I got 9 months sober, and I really thought about at some point today, I should get high. And I was like, man, you made it to 4:30 in the afternoon. Good for you. I mean, it would have been 8:15 after the getting the paper back that I failed. I've been like, oh, I'm done with this. And I'll never forget what he said. I mean, this was 20 something years ago, and he was like, the thing I figured out was that if I went and got high, it wouldn't fix anything.
Right.
And I was like, so just kind of what you were saying earlier was, I mean, it really is true. I mean, it really wouldn't fix anything. And the thing that would happen is things would, I would go get high, alter my state, but the same problems would be there tomorrow.
Right. And
So-
and maybe have increased themselves, which is one of the things that we always found. Yeah.
So, and then that was, and kind of fast forwarding it was, and I think what we were talking about earlier was, I made a decision to give it a shot. Same thing we were talking to Kayla earlier about is you got to do this one day at a time. I never committed to doing this for as long as I did. I just saw things in my life really do get better, and I think one of the amazing things that happens is we were talking about like the friendships, and then it's scoldering hot in this room. I mean, I don't know if you can tell I'm sweating and, and I was like,
You got the job. What are you worried about?
10
You don't need to
minutes.
sweat anymore.
For the first 10 minutes, we sat here and talked about people who were important to us. And and just to let me, for you guys to know, that would have not been what I would have been talking about. No one meant that much to me except for using, drinking, or maybe that person I was interested in that time. And you meet, these relationships and, you get to a spot where then, I become not so important in other people, talking about sponsoring, giving back, being of service. And so, and so for me, I'm very grateful. I'm still to this day, I'm very grateful to what my parents did at 18. I cannot imagine how hard that was. I do know that they sat and cried, and very scared to get the phone call that wasn't coming home. But again, that's the best thing that they've ever done for me. And so getting back to it, I know it's a very, very long answer, is what we are, what the Insight program is, it is a program for people who are, who have drug and alcohol problems, and again, at that age group of people we're dealing with, it may not be every area of their life. It could be parts of their lives are starting to be affected by the way that they use drugs and alcohol. And then the big part is trying to help them find something better than that. And nowadays that's really, really difficult with how easy, it's, it's going to be legal. It should be legal. It's going to be legal here in North Carolina. It's here. Everybody does it, and so really helping them with the piece of, this is causing some serious problems in your life, but then what to do with that void. And so the big part about Insight, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, is not only is it really helping people, and people have to have truly a desire to want to be there, but there's also a long-term support group that goes along with it. So it's not just, you get 30 days sober, pat on the butt, good luck, go figure it out. It's get 2-3 months sober, out of treatment, and then you have a support group to stay sober long-term wise. You have those meetings that I was talking about attending. We do social activities every Friday and Saturday night. And there's people. So I went to college for the first time sober. That was weird. I had people to go through that with. I had friends. I had stuff to do. Because my biggest fear was getting out. All those times when parents found programs I would do really well, was I was going to get out and I was like, what am I going to go do? I'm going to be bored. I'm going to be wondering what all my older friends are doing. What about all those normal people? What are all of those? I had to find some people to connect to and get into. So that's a big, major component. So,
it's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it until listening to you talk. It is amazing what a role drinking and drugging become the only thing that you're good at and the only thing you focus on. And there really is this perceived void that's getting ready to come because you don't do that anymore. And, it's funny. We go right, if you're lucky, and three of us are in recovery, so we're all lucky, you find that those things that you enjoyed before you were drinking and drugging are still there, and you're still pretty good at it, So I appreciate the honesty in that conversation. The one thing that you did say I wanted to ask you about is your story reminds me of me. I guess I was a little shy, whatever, but my life was pretty good. Drugs and alcohol made me feel greater. It wasn't like I didn't feel great. It made me feel greater. I know some people feel less than. I don't think I ever did, and it sounded like you didn't either, but it's like all of a sudden I got high the first time, or first time that alcohol really, kissed me. It made me feel better than I had ever felt before.
correct.
And so I think that one of the things that and Lewis speaks to this so well, is there's always a reason that the drugs and alcohol creep into somebody's decision making. It's usually there's another ism in there somewhere that's hiding, and that drugs and alcohol seem to make it go away or make it less of a hindrance to the way you live. Very few people just drink and drug because they want to. Usually there's a reason for it.
Correct.
But yours, a little bit like mine, I was a good athlete. I had going on. Alcohol gave me maybe a little more courage. Drugs made me a little bit cooler, whatever. But it's just I think that it's just interesting.
Well, I think it's a sense of belonging. You finally fit in, or you feel comfortable in your own
It's a
skin.
group. It's a group that you can dominate in your mind if you get enough in you.
That's that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it.
Whether you're dominating or not, you
Yeah.
feel like you can.
Yeah, it puts you in charge, and it puts you in charge, and it removes that little bit of discomfort in getting yourself in front of everybody. It makes you go to the front of the line quickly with a lot more confidence.
So I have a question for you. So as you're telling your story, and by the way, I had not heard that. It's pretty cool. You did not take as long as we did, right? So you've still got some learning to do. So but I do have a question, because you see kids just like you. What do you tell the new Will who comes into your program? What is it? What advice do you give them? How do you get through to them?
I think the first part is relating to them, and so I sat and met with a counselor who was in recovery themselves the first time before I went to this meeting. And what was impressive to me, and this is nothing against the age of people in this room, but it wasn't some 7-year-old doctor telling me that drugs were bad. It was this 25, 26-year-old guy who talked with me, and we related about how much we loved getting high. Not liked it, not tried it. It wasn't I tried it once and then we were going to go sing Kumbaya and do hug. It wasn't that. It was I absolutely loved it. And he started talking to me about how much he actually loved it. And I was like, man, this is kind of hitting home. Then he talked about some areas of his life being affected by the way he used. And I was like, all right, so maybe my mom or dad talked to him. But then he started talking about those areas that are really important to us that get taken away from us due to the way that we use drugs and alcohol. I was like, I finally related to someone. Then he talked about it. I was like, do you know anyone who's in recovery? And I laughed at that. I was like, no, I don't know anyone who gets high. And honestly, anyone who is sober didn't want to hang out with me. I had a horrible reputation. And
Yeah.
And so I finally had that sense of relating to someone. So I think talking about that, and it's like, what do you have to lose? So if you're coming in here at some point, obviously things aren't going well. It's not like you go to your first meeting because everything's going really, really well. It's
Right.
not like
not on a winning streak.
yeah. And I'm 40. I hope I go to my first AA meeting. It's not because things are going super well. We're in there for a reason. And I think it's starting to just be honest about it. And then there's this point of providing some hope for some people. Is like, it doesn't have to be like this. Things can get better, but you're gonna have to make some changes. And like what we talked about, being honest, being open-minded, being
Right.
willing to do some stuff differently. And what you'll find out is that, first of all, doing it together and with other people, it's not so difficult. I had a horrible problem with drugs and alcohol. I was obsessed with them. What I realized was that if I talked and shared about that and worked the 12 steps of what I heard just getting pounded in my head, going to these meetings, being in early recovery, treatment, and I started applying these, things actually started getting better. First time I wanted to use on a Wednesday night, I called someone who I knew I could relate to. He said, hey, I'm going to come pick you up. Let's go play basketball. I went and did that and ended up staying sober that night. Ended up actually having fun that night. And I was like, oh, it is possible to have that,
Yeah.
But then also, where do I want to be in my life moving forward? And was like, at some point, I want to get back to where I don't want to be just get by. I have goals. I wanted to get back to that. And I think staying sober and abstaining from drugs and alcohol. And I think the biggest part of working through the steps is you find out. Like for me, I never felt like I fit in. So you would say I had low self-worth and low self-esteem. I didn't show that on the outside, but I did. I never felt like I fit in. You guys are the cool guys. You guys would never want to hang out with me. If I were to ask you guys would probably make fun of me. And I probably should have just asked, hey, you guys want to hang out? Never felt like I belonged. And at a very, very young age, I used drugs and alcohol, and it instantly made me feel that.
Yeah.
And already having an addictive personality, I was one of those people, like anything I touched, I was going to do it 150 miles per hour. And so I think helping people also is saying you can have your life back and actually better and more, and it's not that hard. So do it in one day or one moment at a time, increments, and do it with other people, and you can start seeing your life improve, because we are dealing with people that do feel bad about some of these things. Like if you were to, in a sober breath I would have, they'd be like, how's your relationship with your parents? And I'd be like, it's horrible. They don't trust me. And I'd almost cry about it, and
Yeah.
so how do you start building trust? Well, be honest. How do I have friends? How do I deal with these problems? How can I get back to school? How can I get a job? How can I move out? This freedom. And ultimately, I wanted to own my life. Like I wanted to have a life, not be controlled with getting high, doing cocaine, drinking, those kind of things. So
Yeah. Well, this, and it happens every every week. The hour goes way faster than we wanted it to. How do people find you guys? I mean, how does somebody's listening tonight, and I don't know, Lewis and I have talked a lot recently because Lewis is a tremendous resource for me and my wife when we have people call us, hey, I've got this going on, that going on. But I have recently, for whatever reason, had a lot of parents who are like, what can I do? My son, the police just called me. They found him. He had been beat up and he's knocked out, or they found him wandering around downtown. How do people find you? Because we got plenty of people that are listening that face the same thing that your parents faced.
Right. So you can Google the Insight program, and that's INSIGHT program. There's through Google, or if you look it up on the internet. So word of mouth is a lot. People like Lewis. Lewis is one of a kind in the area. Other therapists know about us in the program, in the area. A lot of other parents who have had family members. There's people in the community. So we do a lot of outreach. And the big part is we're not, just like when we're Lewis, they're not appropriate for everyone. Just like we're not appropriate for everyone.
Right.
So you go out and you meet the masses, and educate people, and that there is something for them to do. And before the time runs out, the one quick thing I did want to say is about the parent involvement of this. So any program, the success rate of your child is going to increase by 50% if there's parent involvement.
Right.
So we do parent support group meetings because you're not alone. And if you're sitting here listening about this, you see these two on a weekly basis, you hear other people, you hear Kayla's story, you hear mine, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I would love that for my loved one. You're not alone. You don't have to do this by yourself. And so there are support group meetings. If they have someone, we provide one on a Monday night. Lewis has access to other meetings. There's a Thursday night meeting, one that goes on in Raleigh. You're not alone. And what happens is it's okay if your 17-year-old son, daughter, doesn't want to do anything. You can still make them do something. You can still get better. The family doesn't have to be affected by that one person's. So there is support for them. And so that was the last thing I was going to say.
As he was telling the story, I thought about this. If more parents would do what your parents did, there would be less need for what you and I do.
Correct.
Because that, to me, the parents and the spouses and the family members hold the key. They just have to turn it in the lock. Mm-hmm. Most of them don't.
Lewis, it was interesting. One of the things that you said to me, I don't know since we've known each other, is that you actually, especially during your interventions or when you're working with somebody new, your client's actually the family. It's not the drug addict. Yeah. We know what to do with them. It's the wild card is how does the family interact with the process? And if they're part of it, and if they support it, or if they'll do what they're told to do, the things that have worked, they can make the opportunity for success so much greater. But you know what? One of the things that I've seen, and just had a case recently, is the parents love the kids. They think they can love them well.
Right.
And you can't love them well.
No, doesn't happen.
Lewis, what's your story? I love.
You
can love them enough that you're going to kill them.
Yeah, you're going to love them to kill them. You keep on loving them until they're gone. And then they won't. Parents have a very difficult time separating that little vision that's 5 years old from that monster that's 16, 17, 18.
Yeah. Well, and let's face it, we all know it. The kid that they are in love with doesn't exist anymore, and they've been invaded by the drugs and alcohol, and that's who's making the decision. So we're down to our last minute here. Lewis, good show. Will, thank you so much for coming in. It's fantastic. And I'm glad to know about your program. We will certainly put that in our little data bank as a resource, and we'll send you some people for sure. Lewis, one of the things that we're going to try and do in the next couple shows, and we're going to reach out to some of the people who have lost loved ones to the disease of alcoholism and drug addiction. And that's one of the things when we had Jan Sow on, and she talked about finding her daughter in the bathroom dead. Those shows, we need to do them every once in a while to remind people the cost. And so we'll reach back out, and we'll also, we'll just see wherever else it goes. I just enjoy showing up and seeing where the show goes, because we never know where we're going to go until we end up there, right?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I have no clue.
And you've been busy. Good gracious, every time I talk to you, you're driving somewhere.
It's busy.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, thanks, everybody.
Yes.
Go to therecoveryboys.com. This show will be posted quickly Terry and Roy, our crack team here, will make sure that it gets out. Terry's amazing. And we will see you again next week on the Recovery Boys. Lewis?
Thank you, Macon.
Thank you, Lewis.
I will
And
see you
thank
next
you, buddy.
week.
All right.
you.
Thanks
Good
so
night,
much.
guys. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
You've been listening to The Recovery Boys on WFJA. Visit the Recovery Boys website at thererecoveryboys.com. We thank you for listening to The Recovery Boys.